What is up, guys? My name is Ben Hartwell. Thanks for checking out the channel. If you haven't already done it yet, why not hit that subscribe button? So if you've seen some of the last videos that I've been doing, we've been testing UAD hardware to see how many plugins each individual device can run. We already did the Arrow and the X6, and I said that once I got my satellite that I would test that too. Well, I've had my satellite for about a month, so it's time to see how many plugins can a satellite quad run. Let's get straight to it. Okay, so I've got Luna loaded up and I've got 4 channels set out that represent the 4 cores that I've got in the satellite. I've also got UAD control panel up so we can see the percentages of that DSP being used on each core. I have still got my X6 connected, as you can see here, but it's turned off, so we're not using any of the DSP power that's in the X6, we're only using the satellite. In one of the previous videos, somebody commented asking why I was running these videos and doing these tests at 44.1K, and the reason for that is that there is a DSP usage chart that UAD did themselves, and they actually ran all those tests at 44.1. So to make sure that my tests line up with UAD's tests, I'm doing all of this at 44.1. even though usually I would run at 48. So hopefully that clears that up. So let's jump straight in and start loading some plugins. This is the SSL channel strip, one of my absolute favorite plugins. I use this all the time, and I think I've started all of these tests with this plugin, so we may as well start here. Now you can see just by loading this one plugin, we've used 8.2% of our first DSP core. That's because we haven't turned on any of the DSP intensive features within this plugin. So if I turn the EQ and the compression on, you can see that we bump our DSP usage up to a massive 35% just with the single plugin. So let's load this across all 4 cores and see where we sit. So with 4 instances loaded, you can see it's loaded 1 onto each core, and all 4 cores are sitting at 35%. So let's load a few more instances. Okay, so I've doubled the amount of plugins. You can see we've got 2 now on each core and we're sat at 69.6%. Let's add another one. Okay, so we're now sat with 3 instances of that plugin across each of our DSP cores, but I have a feeling that it's probably turned off some of those DSP intensive features. So if we check one of these plugins, yeah, we can see that the EQ has been turned off. So if we engage that EQ, we're probably going to hit our DSP limit. Yeah, there's our DSP warning. So what Luna's quite cleverly done is it's realized that it can't load everything that we want in that plugin, so it's just loaded the features that it's got enough DSP to run. So in this case, we can run 2 full versions of the SSL channel strip with the EQ and the compression, and we can run 1 extra version of that SSL channel strip with the compression in, but without that EQ in. Let's try another plugin. This is the Neve 1073, doesn't really need any introduction, it sounds amazing, use it all the time. Without the EQ portion of this plugin engaged, we're sat at 11.7%. If we engage the EQ, we get bumped up to 40.1%. So this is taking a huge amount of DSP to run one plugin. So we're probably not going to be able to load too many of them, maybe 2 per core. Let's give it a try. So with 4 instances loaded, 1 across each core, all 4 cores sat at 40.1%. So we've doubled the amount of plugins, we've got 2 now on each core, and we're sat at 79.7% on each of those cores. Just check, we still have the EQ engaged on those plugins. So let's try another 1 on each core, but we're probably not going to be able to load those. So it has loaded those 4 plugins, but it has disengaged the EQ like it did with the SSL channel strip. If we try and engage that EQ, we get our DSP limit. So it's the same story as the SSL channel strip really. We can load 2 full versions with the EQ engaged and 1 extra instance, but without the EQ. Let's try another plugin. This is the Neve 88RS, another channel strip. It's one that I don't actually own. As you can see, I've got it in demo mode, but I thought it'd be interesting to try a different kind of full channel strip and not just the SSL. So with the plugin just loaded up, we're using 8.8%. If we engage the EQ and the compression, we're sat at 28.4%. So a little less DSP intensive than the other channel strips we've seen, so we might be able to get a few more of these loaded. Give it a try. So with 4 loaded, you can see that it's actually chosen to load 2 across our first 2 cores instead of spreading them out across the 4 cores, and both those cores are sat at 56.9%. With 8 instances loaded, you can see that we've now got 2 across each of our cores, all 4 cores sat at 56.5%. So with 3 instances loaded across each core, we are sat at 84.5%. Let's just check to make sure that everything is still engaged, which it is. Let's try loading another instance. Okay, so it has loaded that instance. We are at 97% on each core. Let's just check to see what is still engaged. It has turned off the EQ like it did with the previous channel strips. So with the Neve 88 RS channel strip, we can get 3 full versions per core, and then we can get 1 extra version with the compression, but without that EQ engaged. Let's try another plugin. This is the Empirical Distressor, probably one of the most famous pieces of gear when it comes to studio compressors. I use this on everything. It sounds great and it's really easy to get a good sound out of. I think it is slightly more DSP intensive than some of the other UAD compressors, but it's definitely worth it for the sound. So with one loaded, we are sat at 25.2%. Let's copy it across all 4 cores and see where we sit. Okay, so we got 4 distressors loaded. It's put 2 onto each of our first 2 cores, and they're sat at 50.3%. So with 8 compressors loaded, 2 across each core, we are sat at 49.9% across each core. 3 onto each core, and we're sat at 74.6%. 4 across each core, so a total of 16 compressors, and we are sat at 99.8% on each of our cores. So there is no way we'll be able to load another one, but let's just try anyway. And there's our DSP warning. So that's quite impressive really. We can load 4 distressors onto each core, and the Distressor is one of the more DSP intensive plugins, so a total of 16 is pretty good going. Let's try another plugin. This is the Teletronix LA-2, one of my absolute favorite compressors to use on bass. It sounds awesome. With just the 1 instance loaded, we are sat at 16.2%. So you can see it's quite a bit less DSP than the previous plugin. So let's load this across our cores and see how far we get. Okay, with 8 of them loaded, 2 onto each core, we are sat at 32%. So I've doubled that, so we've got 4 on each core, so a total of 16 of these compressors, and we're sat at 63.5%. So I've added another 8, so we now have 6 across each core, and we are sat at 95% on each core. So we're probably not going to get any more, but let's try anyway. There's our DSP limit. So we've managed to load a total of 24 of these plugins. That's 6 across each DSP core. Let's try another plugin. This is the 1176 Revision A compressor. Again, another legendary studio compressor. This is also a bit lighter on DSP usage. With 1 loaded, we are sat at 13.7%. So let's load a bunch of these up and see how far we get. So I've loaded 4 across each core, giving us a total of 16 of these compressors, and we're sat at 53.5%. So I've loaded 7 of these compressors across each of our DSP cores, giving us a total of 28 compressors, and we're sat at 93.3% DSP use. So that might be the limit of how many we can load. Let's try loading another 1 and see what happens. There's our DSP limit. That's pretty good going. 7 of these across each DSP core. Let's try another plugin. Okay, this is Verb Pro. As I said in the previous videos, the reason that I'm doing Verb Pro is chances are if you have some UAD hardware, you have Verb Pro, as it comes free with the majority of UAD interfaces. So with 1 instance of Verb Pro loaded, we are at 10% of our DSP use. And if you've seen the X6 video where we loaded Verb Pro, we got loads of these plugins loaded, so we should get quite a lot loaded here. Let's give it a go. Okay, so we've maxed out our insert slots on those 4 channels. That's 8 instances of Verb Pro per DSP core, and we're sat at 76.8%. So in order to be able to load some more, I'm going to have to insert them on my master inserts. So now I've filled up the master inserts. That's 10 instances of Verb Pro per core, and we are sat at 96.8%. So we're not going to be able to load too many more, maybe not even another 1. But in order to try, I'm going to have to add another channel. Okay, so here's our new channel. I'm going to try loading 1 more instance of Verb Pro, but we're probably going to hit our DSP limit. Yep, there's our DSP warning. So we can load a huge 40 instances of Verb Pro. That's 10 across each DSP core. Let's try another plugin. This is the Fairchild 670. It's the legacy version, and I've chosen a legacy plugin because I want to show you how much lower the DSP use is on these legacy plugins. So you can see with just this one instance loaded, we're only using 4.5% of our DSP on that first core. So we should be able to load up a whole load of these plugins. Let's give it a go. So there you go, I've maxed out our insert slots on those 4 channels. That's 8 of these compressors per DSP core, and we're only sat at 32.8% usage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate these channels until we run out of DSP. So I've duplicated all 4 channels, so we've now got 8 channels and 16 instances of the plugin per DSP core, and we've still only sat at 65.7%. So let's duplicate some more. Okay, so I've added another 4 channels, so we've now got 24 of these plugins per DSP core, and we're sat at 98.5%, so we're probably at the limit of what we can load now. So I'll try loading 1 plugin at a time on our master inserts. And there we go, straight away our DSP limit. So with legacy plugins, you can see how many more plugins you can actually use and how much lower the DSP usage is. And with this Fairchild, we've managed to get 24 instances per DSP core. That's a massive 96 instances of this plugin. So if you do find that you are struggling for DSP, if you've only got a solo or an arrow or something like that, legacy versions are a really good way of getting some of that DSP back. Let's try the plugin. So I know some of you guys were interested in some of the UAD amp models and what their DSP usage was like. So this is the Marshall Plexi Classic, a really good sounding Marshall emulation. With 1 loaded onto our first DSP core, we're sat at 31.3%. So let's load up a bunch of these and see how many we get. So with 2 of these loaded per DSP core, we're sat at 62.1%. 3 loaded per DSP core puts us at 92.9% on each of those cores. So we probably can't load another one, but let's give it a try anyway. And there's our DSP limit. And it's worth saying that the reason we can't load another plugin, even though we might have enough DSP when you combine what we've got left over all 4 cores, is because the way that UAD plugins work is you need enough DSP power on a single core to be able to load the entire plugin. You can't share the DSP load across multiple DSP cores. It has to all fit onto 1 DSP core. And so because there's less than 10% on each of our cores left, we haven't got enough left to load the full plugin onto 1 single core. Let's try another plugin. This is the Chandler Curve Bender, a really cool mastering EQ. Another plugin that I've got in demo mode, and one of the really cool things about UAD plugins is you can demo any of the plugins that you're interested at any time, and you get a 14-day free trial. And I'm demoing this plugin because I've heard some really cool things about it, especially from some of the stuff that I've heard Colt Caparoon doing. So I wanted to check it out for myself. Now I know it's a relatively DSP hungry plugin, and with 1 of these loaded, we're sat at 29.5%. So let's load a few up and see where we get. So with 2 loaded per DSP core, we are sat at 58.5%. So with 3 loaded per DSP core, giving us a total of 12 of these EQ plugins, we are sat at 87.5%. Now, even though we've got quite a lot of DSP left, I don't think we're going to be able to load another one. Let's give it a try anyway. And there's our DSP limit. Now the reason that we can't load another plugin is even though we've got loads of DSP left over, we haven't got enough DSP on 1 single core to load the entire plugin, and that's the way that UAD plugins work. So even though here we've got more than 10% left on each core, we haven't got enough on 1 single core to load another instance. Okay, so now let's try a few combinations of plugins and see how that DSP gets divided up. Okay, so this is quite a cool combination that we've got loaded up here. We've got the SSL channel with the EQ and the compression engaged. We've got a Distressor, we've got the Pultec EQ, that is a legacy version, and the real Verb Pro loaded. I've put that across each of our channels. So you can see here we've got 4 plugins per DSP core, and we're sat at 72.9% DSP. So you can see that's quite a lot of stuff loaded with some pretty DSP intensive plugins but we've still got plenty of DSP left over to load some more plugins on other channels or the master. Let's try another combination. Okay, so we've got another cool combination set up here. We've got the 1073 with the EQ engaged. I've got an 1176, this is the AE version. We've got that Teletronix LA-2, and we've got the curve bender. Put that across each of our 4 channels. So we've got 4 plugins again per DSP core, and we're sat at 98.5%. And we know that these 2 plugins, the 1073 and the curve bender, are both DSP intensive. So managing to load 4 instances of each of those plugins is pretty good. Let's try another combination. So here's a cool combination that shows you just how much stuff we can load per DSP core. We've got 5 plugins on each of our cores, but we're only sat at 58.9%. So what we've got loaded is that 88 RS channel with our EQ and our compression engaged. We've got an 1176, this is the Rev A version. We've got the precision delay, the Pultec EQ, which is a legacy version, and Real Verb Pro. And we've got that chain across all 4 of our cores, and we've still got loads of DSP left over. So let's try one more combination. Okay, here's a combination where we're pretty much maxing out what we can do. I've got the Neve preamp going into the SSL channel strip. We're only using the compression side because we haven't got enough DSP to load the EQ. That's going into an 1176, this is the Rev E version. We're then going into an LA-2A, this is the silver version, and then into a 1073 where we are using the EQ. So that's 5 plugins on each of our cores, and we're sat at 92.8% across each of those DSP cores. So there you can see we can load quite a lot of stuff just with the 4 cores that we've got in the satellite, but we are having to limit some of the features that we can turn on and off depending on how much DSP those features use, such as the EQ in that SSL channel strip. But that's precisely what those legacy versions are perfect for. If we didn't need all the features that are on this full version of the SSL channel strip, we could load the legacy version and get 90% of what we needed from that plugin instead at much lower DSP use. So there you go, pretty much as you would expect. The more cores you've got, the more plugins you can run. And I found it really interesting just how many plugins you can load onto each of those single cores and how all that DSP power is allocated across the number of plugins that you have. And it really emphasized just how useful those legacy versions of those plugins are if you start running out of DSP power. I'm going to do a video soon comparing the results of these past few videos that I've done testing UAD hardware so that we can compare the findings on how many plugins each of these devices can run. So there you go guys, I hope you found this video useful and I hope you liked it. If you did, give it a thumbs up below. If you want to watch another video on my channel, you can do it just up here. And don't forget to subscribe, you can do it right there. See you in the next one.